In the heart of Maplewood, a seemingly perfect life disintegrated into chaos and bloodshed. What began as a hidden affair between a married man and his sister-in-law ended in a night of explosive confrontation and murder. How did a seemingly idyllic town become the backdrop for such a horrific betrayal? What drove Rebecca Parker to the edge of sanity, leading to a devastating act of violence? Rebecca Parker and Emily Collins grew up in the charming town of Maplewood, surrounded by green parks and cozy shops. Their parents worked hard to meet daily needs, but were always determined to give their children a good education. This loving and supportive environment helped shape Rebecca and Emily's strong family bonds. Rebecca, born in 1976, was known for her sense of responsibility and ambition. Her parents' hard work inspired her to excel in school and in the community. She became a role model in Maplewood, achieving great academic success and participating in local activities. Rebecca earned a scholarship to Harvard University and followed a clear path: get a degree, build a career, and start a family. Emily Collins, born in 1984, took a different path. In high school, she loved the arts and humanities. At college, she excelled in creative writing and art. Emily's creative talents and involvement in student groups showed her unique skills and love for different perspectives. In her 20s, Emily tried various jobs and relationships, but struggled to find stability. Despite their differences, Rebecca supported Emily as much as she could. Their relationship was loving but had its tensions. Rebecca felt proud but also frustrated by Emily's lack of direction, while Emily envied Rebecca's success. Rebecca enjoyed the structured life in Maplewood, while Emily sought excitement and change. Daniel Parker, born in 1974, is the husband of Rebecca Parker. Growing up in a modest family in a neighboring town, Daniel's early life was marked by a strong work ethic and a keen interest in finance. After completing his studies in finance at a state university, Daniel built a successful career as a financial advisor, known for his meticulous and analytical skills. His professional achievements led him to Maplewood, where he met Rebecca at a local charity event. Their shared values and mutual respect quickly deepened into a committed relationship, culminating in a marriage celebrated by their close-knit community. The town of Maplewood, with its neatly trimmed lawns, Victorian architecture, and close-knit community, was a picturesque and lively place where everyone knew everyone, and gatherings like the annual Maplewood Festival were cherished traditions. In this idyllic setting, Daniel and Rebecca Parker were admired as the epitome of success and grace, their marriage often envied and held up as an example of perfection within the community. However, beyond the facade of perfection, as weeks passed by, Daniel and Rebecca's marriage had begun to show signs of strain. The initial spark that had brought them together was fading, and they were struggling to maintain the closeness they once had. Daniel, in particular, felt restless and unfulfilled. His job was demanding, and he often felt the pressure to provide the kind of life he believed Rebecca deserved. Emily, the younger sister of Rebecca, called, informing her that she would be returning to Maplewood. Rebecca was thrilled about the news and eagerly shared it with Daniel. They both felt a sense of excitement at the prospect of having Emily close again. When Emily moved back to Maplewood, she chose an apartment close to Rebecca and Daniel's home. Her arrival was warmly welcomed, and the three of them often spent time together, enjoying dinners, movie nights, and weekend outings. To the outside world, they appeared to be a happy, close-knit family. However, beneath the surface, things were not as perfect as they seemed. Emily's return added a new dynamic to their lives. She was lively and free-spirited, bringing a breath of fresh air into their routine. Daniel found himself drawn to her energy and spontaneity, qualities he felt were missing from his life with Rebecca. Emily, too, was charmed by Daniel's attention. He was attentive, flattering, and seemed genuinely interested in her stories and experiences. At first, their interactions were innocent enough: friendly conversations, shared jokes, and occasional outings without Rebecca. But as time went on, the attraction between Daniel and Emily grew stronger. They began to find excuses to spend time alone, and what started as a harmless friendship soon developed into something more serious. Rebecca, busy with her teaching and community activities, didn't notice the growing bond between her sister and her husband. She trusted them both completely and had no reason to suspect that anything was amiss. She was happy to see Daniel and Emily getting along so well, believing it would strengthen their family ties. As the months passed, however, subtle changes began to surface. Daniel started coming home later than usual, explaining it away with work commitments. Emily, too, became more secretive about her whereabouts and activities. There were moments of awkwardness and tension that Rebecca couldn't quite put her finger on. Despite the warning signs, Rebecca remained blissfully unaware of the affair. Her love for Daniel and her sister blinded her to the possibility of betrayal. She continued to go about her daily life, confident that her marriage and her family were solid and secure. Meanwhile, the relationship between Daniel and Emily deepened. What had started as a forbidden romance was quickly turning into an obsession. Daniel was captivated by Emily's vivaciousness and felt a renewed sense of excitement and adventure. Emily, in turn, felt a thrill in the illicit nature of their relationship, even as she grappled with guilt and fear of discovery. The affair took a toll on both of them. Daniel became increasingly distant and irritable, struggling to balance his feelings for Emily with his responsibilities to Rebecca. Emily, caught between her love for her sister and her passion for Daniel, found herself in a constant state of turmoil. She knew that what they were doing was wrong, but she couldn't bring herself to end it. As the affair continued, Daniel, Emily, and Rebecca's lives became more complicated. For a while, it seemed like they had found the perfect balance, keeping their secret hidden. Daniel spent time with Rebecca, pretending to be a loving husband, while secretly meeting Emily. However, as the months passed, subtle changes began to surface. Emily's once cheerful personality changed. She became more withdrawn and anxious, constantly fearing the truth would come out. Rebecca noticed these changes but thought Emily was just adjusting to life back in Maplewood. She had no idea of the storm brewing underneath. As the days passed, Daniel's fixation on Emily deepened. He became enamored with the way she laughed during their beach outings, the way her eyes sparkled in the sunlight, and the effortless way she carried herself during their hikes. Every shared moment became an opportunity for him to imagine a different reality. The time they spent together, once a symbol of their familial closeness, now fueled his obsession. His thoughts were consumed by Emily, and he found himself daydreaming about her during work, unable to focus on anything but her. The intense, almost magnetic attraction he felt was slowly but surely tearing apart the life he had with Rebecca. The once simple, joyful activities now seemed tainted by his unrelenting thoughts of Emily, creating a rift in his marriage that was growing wider with each passing day. But soon, it became clear that Daniel's interest in Emily went beyond their agreement. He started showing up unannounced, demanding her time and attention. Emily, who had initially enjoyed the thrill of their secret meetings, began to feel trapped. She loved Daniel but was increasingly aware of the dangerous path they were on. The excitement was replaced by fear and uncertainty about what might happen next. Emily's fears were not unfounded. Daniel's obsession grew darker over time. He became possessive and jealous, questioning Emily about her interactions with other men. The thrill of their affair was replaced by a suffocating tension that Emily couldn't escape. She began to fear what might happen if she tried to end things with Daniel, knowing how unpredictable he had become. But she wasn't prepared for the drastic turn of events that would soon unfold. One evening, after a particularly heated argument with Rebecca, Daniel stormed out of the house and went straight to Emily's apartment. His mind was clouded with anger and desperation, and Emily could see that something had shifted. Daniel's once passionate love had turned into a dangerous obsession, and Emily was caught in the middle of a storm she couldn't control. The tension between them reached a boiling point. Daniel's dark thoughts consumed him, and he began to talk about drastic measures to be with Emily. The idea of leaving Rebecca was no longer enough. He wanted a more permanent solution, one that would free him from his marriage and allow him to be with Emily without fear of discovery. Emily, horrified by Daniel's dark turn, tried to reason with him. She pleaded with him to think about the consequences, to consider Rebecca's feelings and the impact it would have on their lives. But Daniel was beyond reason. His obsession had taken over, and he was willing to do whatever it took to be with Emily. Rebecca, caught in the middle of this growing conflict, tried to keep her family together. She reached out to Daniel, hoping to rekindle the love they once had. But Daniel's heart was no longer with her. His thoughts were consumed by Emily, and every interaction with Rebecca only pushed him further away. The interactions between Daniel and Emily became increasingly strained. Emily, feeling the weight of the affair, started to pull back. She couldn't continue living a lie, but she was afraid of what Daniel might do if she ended things. The fear of his reaction kept her trapped in a situation that was spiraling out of control. As the conflict developed, the stakes grew higher. Emily's fear and guilt consumed her, making her every interaction with Rebecca a painful reminder of her betrayal. Daniel's obsession turned darker, and his behavior became more erratic and unpredictable. The once harmless adventure had turned into a nightmare, and the consequences of their actions loomed large. The tension between them was like a ticking time bomb, ready to explode at any moment. Every conversation, every glance, every action was filled with underlying conflict. The facade of normalcy was cracking, and it was only a matter of time before the truth came out. Emily's once strong bond with Rebecca had turned into a constant source of pain and guilt. She struggled to meet her sister's eyes, burdened by the betrayal she was concealing. The emotional toll was immense, with every pretense becoming increasingly difficult to maintain. Guilt ate away at her, overshadowing her interactions and making each shared moment with Rebecca feel hollow. Every question about Daniel intensified her anxiety, deepening her internal conflict and causing a profound sense of isolation. The weight of her deception fractured her sense of self, leaving her overwhelmed and deeply distressed. As the affair continued, the tension between Daniel, Emily, and Rebecca grew more intense. Their interactions became fraught with underlying emotions and hidden motives. The balance they had managed to maintain began to crumble as the months passed. However, as the months passed, subtle changes began to surface. Daniel became more reckless, taking bigger risks to see Emily. His obsession with her was growing, and he was no longer content with their secret meetings. He wanted more. He wanted her all to himself. Emily, on the other hand, was becoming increasingly anxious. The thrill of their affair was overshadowed by the fear of getting caught. She was constantly looking over her shoulder, worried that someone would discover their secret. The weight of their betrayal was starting to take its toll on her. Rebecca, still oblivious to the affair, was growing more concerned about the changes in her husband and sister. She couldn't understand why Daniel was becoming more distant, or why Emily seemed so on edge. She tried to reach out to both of them, hoping to bridge the growing gap in their relationships. But her efforts were in vain. Daniel and Emily were too consumed by their own guilt and fear to respond to Rebecca's attempts at reconciliation. As the tension grew, the cracks in their perfect lives began to appear. Rebecca noticed small but troubling signs that something was wrong. Inconsistencies in their stories, unusual behavior, and odd changes in their routines started to raise her suspicions. The trust she once had in Daniel and Emily slowly began to crumble. Instead of the warmth and love she was used to, Rebecca felt a cold distance between them. Each new oddity made her more doubtful and wary, and she found herself questioning everything she thought she knew about the people closest to her. The inevitable confrontation came on a stormy night in Maplewood. The air was thick with tension, and the sound of thunder rumbled in the distance. Rebecca, unable to shake her suspicions any longer, decided to confront Daniel and Emily. She needed answers, and she was determined to get them. She arrived at Emily's apartment unannounced, her heart pounding in her chest. The scene that greeted her confirmed her worst fears. Daniel and Emily were together, their expressions a mix of shock and guilt as they saw Rebecca standing in the doorway. Rebecca's heart raced as she took in the sight before her. The storm outside mirrored the turmoil within her. The betrayal she had never imagined was now undeniable. She felt a surge of anger and heartbreak, emotions that threatened to overwhelm her. Rebecca's voice trembled as she demanded answers from Daniel and Emily. The tension in the room was palpable as years of repressed emotions and hidden resentments came flooding out. Rebecca's words cut through the silence, each one laced with pain and betrayal. She questioned how they could do this to her, how they could betray her trust so completely. Emily's eyes filled with tears as she tried to explain. She struggled to find the words to justify her actions, but nothing she said could ease Rebecca's pain. Daniel stood by, his expression one of guilt and regret. He knew there was no way to fix the damage that had been done. Rebecca's anger, a force of its own, seemed to envelop her entirely. In a moment of unrestrained fury, she grabbed a heavy candlestick from a nearby table and hurled it at Daniel. The candlestick flew through the air but missed its target, clattering against the wall behind him. Daniel, recognizing the danger, tried to close the distance between them, his voice rising as he attempted to reason with Rebecca. Despite his efforts to calm her, Rebecca's rage was uncontrollable. She advanced toward him, her eyes blazing with a mixture of hurt and fury. The argument grew more heated, Daniel's attempts to hold her still failing, as she was driven by an unrelenting need to be heard. As Daniel tried to grasp her shoulders and reason with her, Rebecca's anger only intensified. She quickly glanced at the candlestick that had fallen to the floor, her face contorted with rage. In a sudden, violent move, Rebecca reached down, picked up the candlestick, and with a forceful motion, struck Daniel directly on the head. The impact was brutal and immediate. Daniel staggered, his expression one of shock and pain, before collapsing onto the floor. Blood pooled around him as he lay motionless, his life rapidly slipping away. The room fell into a heavy silence, the gravity of the situation settling over Rebecca like a suffocating fog. Her rage dissolved into disbelief as she stared at Daniel's lifeless body. She fell to her knees beside him, her hands shaking uncontrollably as she reached out to him. "Daniel! Daniel, please stand up!" she cried out, her voice cracking with desperation. But there was no response. Her pleas went unanswered, the silence of the room growing more profound with each passing second. Emily, who had been standing in stunned shock, slowly approached the scene. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with a mix of horror and disbelief. She hesitantly checked Daniel's pulse, her fingers trembling as they rested on his neck. The seconds stretched into what felt like an eternity as she confirmed what was already evident. There was no pulse, no sign of life. "Rebecca," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "He's dead. You killed him." The reality of Emily's words struck Rebecca like a physical blow. Her hands flew to her mouth in a gesture of horror as she looked at Daniel's lifeless body, her mind reeling from the enormity of what had just occurred. Panic set in, and the two women were left to confront the terrifying reality of their situation. Emily's eyes were filled with fear and accusation, her mind racing as she faced Rebecca. The urgency and the need to act drove Emily into a state of panic. The weight of the situation pressed heavily on her mind as she grappled with the immediate necessity of dealing with Daniel's lifeless body. Rebecca, too, was overtaken by fear, but her terror quickly transformed into a cold, calculated resolve. Her thoughts raced as she evaluated their dire predicament. Her voice, though trembling, carried a steely determination as she spoke. Hiding the body was the only option Rebecca could envision. Overshadowed by the looming fear of imprisonment, the gravity of their predicament pressed down on them, pushing them to act with a desperate clarity. They dragged Daniel's body into a closet, attempting to conceal it as best as they could. Their movements were frantic, their fear palpable as they tried to figure out how to cover their tracks. They debated what to do next, their panic only adding to their confusion. The thought of calling for help crossed Emily's mind, but it was quickly overshadowed by Rebecca's vehement opposition. The fear of involving the police loomed large in Rebecca's mind. She argued that calling the authorities would seal their fate, their voices thick with desperation and practicality. The night wore on as the two women worked in tense silence, their actions driven by fear and desperation. They scrubbed at the bloodstains on the carpet, tried to erase any trace of their presence in the room, and kept a vigilant watch on the closet where Daniel's body was hidden. The weight of their crime pressed heavily on them, their fear growing with each passing hour. The following morning, the police arrived at the house, responding to a concerned neighbor's report of a commotion. Rebecca and Emily, now forced to confront the reality of their situation, were subjected to intense scrutiny. The investigators noted inconsistencies in their accounts and grew suspicious of their behavior. The discovery of Daniel's body in the closet was a devastating blow that shattered the illusion of normalcy Rebecca and Emily had tried so hard to maintain. The investigation unfolded with relentless thoroughness. Evidence was meticulously collected, and detectives worked tirelessly to piece together the events of that fateful night. Rebecca and Emily were questioned repeatedly, their stories scrutinized and dissected. As the investigation progressed, the truth about the night of Daniel's death began to emerge. The trial that followed was fraught with tension and emotion. The courtroom was filled with spectators, their eyes fixed on the dramatic proceedings. Rebecca and Emily faced serious charges, their defense attorneys struggling to present a case that could mitigate their culpability. The prosecution presented a damning case, detailing the violent altercation and the subsequent attempts to conceal the body. Witness testimonies, including those of neighbors who had heard the commotion, painted a stark picture of the events leading up to Daniel's death. During the trial, Rebecca and Emily's testimonies were marked by emotional strain. Rebecca fought to maintain her composure as she recounted the events of that night, her guilt and sorrow evident in her voice. Emily, too, struggled with her emotions, her eyes often cast down as she faced the weight of her actions. The courtroom was gripped by the drama of the trial, the emotional impact of the proceedings palpable to all who attended. Ultimately, both women were found guilty of their roles in Daniel's death. The verdict was a crushing blow, and the sentences they received were a harsh reminder of the consequences of their actions. The community of Maplewood, once enamored with the Parkers' perfect image, was left to grapple with the fallout of the tragedy. The town watched in somber silence as the lives of Rebecca and Emily were forever altered by their choices. In the aftermath of the trial, Rebecca and Emily faced the harsh reality of their new lives. Their days in prison were marked by the weight of their guilt and the isolation from a community that had once admired them. The glamorous life they had once enjoyed was now a distant memory, replaced by the stark and unforgiving reality of confinement. The story of Daniel's death became a cautionary tale, a somber reminder of how quickly things could unravel and the devastating consequences of allowing anger and betrayal to go unchecked.